Hey y'all, Laura Richardson with Relevate. We are Real Estate Elevated. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of I'm Moving to North Carolina, Now What? We have our home insurance edition for you guys today, and we are getting the pleasure of meeting Steve Arrington with Farm Bureau. Steve's going to kind of dive a little bit in here on what home insurance looks like in North Carolina. If you're moving here from out of state, there are some things that you need to be aware of because it could be a little bit different than where you're coming from. So without further ado, Steve, tell us a little bit about you and Farm Bureau. What makes you so great in this industry, right?
Well, Laura, thanks for having me. Yes, I am Steve Arrington with North Carolina Farm Bureau Mutual Insurance Company. We are a North Carolina-based insurance company, so we can do things a little differently than national companies can do. I've been in the business almost 20 years, and so I've been doing this a long time and obviously seen lots of different scenarios with folks moving here. And yes, insurance is driven by state regulations. So, any state can be totally different, so where you came from versus here can be totally different in what's offered and what's included and the pricing from that.
Absolutely. So before we dive into how do we even find our insurance agent or what questions are good ones to ask, right? Why do you love this field? Because home insurance is kind of a unique space, right? So what made you get into this in the first place?
I used to be in the golf business, and I was recruited by a client of mine, and the question he asked me at the time was, do you like coming to the same place every day? At the time I did. Met my wife. Didn't like it as much once I wanted my weekends and nights free, especially in the retail world and holidays and that kind of thing. And then the thing that I think had drew me and kept me in the field is the ability to help people. Actually our tagline for our company is helping you is what we do best. And I think I never like to sell, unlike your world where you sell and you may not be able to sell again for a long period of time. My goal is I don't even like the word sell. My goal is to help you acquire the insurance you need to protect the most important things in your life and then help you for the rest of your life. And so I think that's a little different and why I enjoy it because I get to keep seeing you. And as your families grow, as your kids grow up and hopefully be their agent as well. And so, it's a long-term investment to help folks.
Yeah, and I think that's a great thing to bring up is what do you need? And that's something that we're going to talk about today is what do you need moving to North Carolina? Because there's definitely some policies that we could possibly add that maybe are not necessary because we don't really see those acts of God or those nature type things happen here in the great state of North Carolina. So let's talk a little bit about how we initially get started with the process. So policy hunting versus working with an agent. There's a big difference between the two. Can you kind of speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some basics when it comes to home insurance. Primarily in North Carolina, there's two different types of policies. There's an HO3 or an HE7 are the two most common for primary residents when you come to North Carolina. They both have their advantages. We primarily sell just HO3s, and I'd say about 80% of those policies in North Carolina, that's what you see. There are a couple of companies that still offer HE7s. I almost think the HE stands for highly endorsed because that's what it is. It's basically a basic HO3 policy. They add a bunch of stuff, and for most people, it doesn't even come into play. But those are the two things. And then, so when you're working with a company versus an agent, I think you have to have somebody who discusses the issues, right? So when we do underwriting for insurance, we look at the person and the home, okay? And so if you've had claims history in your past, but you're coming to a new location, probably a good thing. But, the home could be a problem. And so water claims are probably our biggest kind of red flags with homes. If you're something I like to obviously do is, check those claims before you get into a contract because you could run into an issue of having almost force-placed insurance to cover a home that you really love because water issues. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a huge thing when you're dealing with just policy shopping on the internet versus dealing with somebody is to have those conversations and hopefully somebody's going to point those things out and not just sell you a policy.
Absolutely. And we've talked about this on another episode that we've had of moving to North Carolina is the fact that sometimes looking at the backstory of the house can give you a lot of information. You don't want to take it for face value, right? There are certain facts that are represented in an MLS listing or that are even represented in like GIS mapping, right? But being able to look at the backstory with the home insurance world, it's a completely different record of events that's pretty important before you put maybe one of the biggest purchases of your life on the line. So let's talk about things that you need here in North Carolina. So to give you an example, I had some clients that were moving here from California. And in California, earthquakes are kind of a thing. They have them pretty regularly. So why would they not need earthquake insurance per se here in North Carolina? Do we have that even?
Well, since I've been in the business, there is actually a fault line that runs through Roseville. And so there was a tremor that was felt, and that's been more than a decade ago, right? So it's not something common. It's something we do sell. But in my 20 years, it's never come up, right? Even when that happened, there was no claims associated with it. And the tough thing about that coverage, it's based on percentage. Your deductible is a percentage of your coverage amount. And once people see the rates for that, they tend to move on from that standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that the sellers of that particular property that my buyers with the earthquake situation were looking in, they actually still had that on their policy because they were working with a different company that it was a national organization, and they just carried the same policies from California and North Carolina. So that was definitely some money they probably could have placed elsewhere, right?
Yeah, and I think, again, California has their problems. We have our problems, right? Wind is a much bigger concern for us. We're on the East Coast. Atlantic hurricane seasons are big dates for us. And so I think that you just have to, again, have the conversation with an agent of what's important, and where you should spend your money or most likely to spend your money of things that actually may happen to you.
Absolutely. And so speaking of the coast, something that we typically have a lot of conversation about because it's a big question is hurricanes are something that people know when they move to North Carolina. That's a possibility. But also let's talk about flood insurance. What do you know about flood insurance? Is it something I should even worry about if I'm a consumer or a buyer?
Well, the thing, that policy is driven mostly by lenders because if you're going to buy a home that's in a flood zone, they're going to require you to have it. But the thing I think any homeowner needs to understand, and again, this goes back to talking to your agent, is anyone can buy flood insurance on any property. There is some base limits. It's federally regulated from a pricing standpoint, so it's not like you go shop that around. You pretty much either do it or you don't. But yeah, there are. even in Wake County and even in the Triangle, there are definitely some flood zones. There's some little creeks and tributaries, especially around Crabtree Creek, over near the mall. That they get extra water. They are a problem, and so again, have the conversation. Look at the history of the property. And have check it out from all sides because. As much as you may like that house, it might not be your home if it's always a problem. So from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And that's something that we definitely discuss with buyers is if you're going to have to carry that additional flood policy, it may be out of your monthly budget that we're trying so closely to stick to. So some quick tools for you guys that are listening to go check out. Obviously, your GIS mapping system that every single county has is going to highlight flood zones. They pull it directly from FEMA's risk maps. We did have some stuff that changed in the last year or so that, again, is more tied to the lending side of things, but looking at that risk management 2.0. Dive a little bit deeper into that if it's something that you're considering or if you're open to a house that is in a flood zone, because I know that there are some buyers I've worked with. It doesn't matter to them at all, and they're willing to take that extra cost because they really like the property.
And that's the thing to remember with some of the flood policies too is like your property may be in a flood zone, but the house may not. So that that'll drive the rate. So there are very few homes in this area that are in a flood zone. Now properties, property lines that run back to slopes and those kind of things can be, which aren't too bad. But yeah, you just have to watch to see how much of the structure may be in that flood zone.
Absolutely. So is there anything else important that folks who are moving here, especially from other states that maybe you've experienced, they need to know before they move to North Carolina?
Well, I think, again, working with an agent to me is just such a much better way to look at this because all companies do things different when they start packaging policies, right? And depending on where you're coming from, North Carolina has some of the most competitive auto rates in the country. So especially if you're coming from a no-fault state, some of the Northeast states, that you come down here and you're like, whoa, that's that cheap. And so, and you're always going to get a better price on the home and the auto if you do both in the same company. And as an agent, I always like to be your agent, not a policy writer kind of thing. And the more I know about you, the more I can help you, the more I can look out for you. So I would, no matter who you do business with, I would definitely try to do it with the same company and the same agent so that you can, because there's some things, just imagine a tree fell and hit your house and your car. Would you want to deal with two companies?
Yeah,
absolutely. That would be, nightmare in my world of having to deal with two people, where if you work with the same company, it'd be the same adjuster and, and one company helping you. So.
Well, I think that's a valid point and something that we haven't talked about that I think has become more prevalent, especially in the last couple of years. Our market in real estate has just completely taken off in the last 2 years. So, with that being said, we've seen an influx of investors, people who don't even live here that are wanting to purchase a home to get that rental income. Or we've seen massive seller possessions, which, guys, keep in mind, a seller possession period is an addendum added to a contract that essentially says that seller, the person you're buying the house from, gets to keep it for some extra days. It could be 1 up to 59, because by day 60, you're required to actually move into the home if it's a primary property. So, how does that look if you're trying to carry a home insurance policy, but you don't actually live here yet?
Yeah, there's obviously a couple different angles there. So if he is the seller's staying there for a little bit, there's some things we can do there. Because you basically become a de facto landlord when you buy the house, right? So there's some short-term things we can do there. If you are an investor, companies are all over the board when it comes to how they do that. For us as a company, we're going to write it, the policy maybe one way. If you're an out-of-state, then there's a way to do it with liability and those kind of things. Because there's two parts to insure a property. It's the actual property coverage and the liability piece, especially from a landlord situation, because you're not living there. So you don't actually know what's going on. And obviously if something's going on with the structure, you're not living there every day, so you don't know what's going on. There's, again, make sure you have a conversation and don't just assume that I can buy a house and put somebody in it and move on. I mean, there's some things you need to look out for, because one bad liability claim could put a damper on your financial picture.
Absolutely. So thinking of timeline here, because we've been talking about extra days in your contract, or if you're thinking about buying an investment property, at what point in the process, if I'm looking to buy a home, should I reach out and connect with somebody for home insurance?
As soon as you write the contract, honestly, because and even before, if you kind of can get to me, because then we can check out the home, right? And I think it'd be a horror story for you to fall in love with a house, write a contract, and you're like, whoa, they had 3 water claims. What happened with that? Is there an underlying issue, right? And so the more time, the better, because then, we can actually look at the property, look at you as an individual, get you all the pricing, and then kind of get it ready to go. I mean, what we do is, a couple of hours we can have you ready to go. But again, if there is an issue with the house specifically, that at least you'll know before you get in over your head and maybe lose some money that you put down that you can't get back.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely valid. So if somebody wants to reach out to you and connect with you, those details are going to be in the bottom of this episode. You can contact Steve either via email or by phone, and he can definitely get you set up with the right information that you need. Steve, anything else that you'd like to leave us with today?
Yeah, I think, I pride myself on communication and being timely in your process, because I know that's a huge part of when you're buying a home, right, that you want to be able to sure you can get in there. And I'm kind of proud of myself that I won't be the reason you won't close on time. So,
there you go.
And I'll be the first to tell you that we're not the company for you, or there's somebody maybe better for a certain situation. But again, I think that comes from doing it the right way, the ethical way, and making sure that we're looking out for you.
Absolutely. Well, guys, if you are looking for honesty and integrity, Steve is definitely the person that you want to reach out to. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.